I experienced something incredibly tragic in my life. And I was in a very lost, sort of broken place. And this opportunity to go to Alaska presented itself. We stumble across this mother and her cub. And I had a moment when this cub stood up on its mother's back to really ponder. And she seemed so tiny, so fragile, so vulnerable, and so completely dependent and trusting on her mother's comfort and provision. He was giving me a God wink, and I had an opportunity to say, okay, like, I see you, I hear you, I see that I can trust you and depend on you, that you will care for me.
Hello and welcome to the Wild Shutter Podcast. I'm Matthew Gehly. I'm very excited today to have Amy Harris with us, adventure.amy on Instagram. And if you're familiar with Amy's work, you know that you're in store for a great conversation today. So welcome, Amy. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much. I'm super happy to be here talking about things that are very dear to me.
Yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time out. So to start off our conversation here, tell us just a little bit about what got you hooked on wildlife photography.
So I would assume that it started in high school. I took a photography class. I can't say that I loved that photography class or that I learned anything really from that photography class.
That hurts a little bit because I teach video production, so that's okay.
Really sorry. But it was the first time that I was picking up a camera and setting out to photograph things with intention for the class. And I think I quickly realized that just taking pictures in general just made me happy. In a way, I guess it was a form of self-expression. And then I would just look for things or moments to photograph. And I was always in high school, the friend who had the camera along and took the pictures of everyone and then had the roll of film developed, and so that's really how it started. And fast forward, I get married and I moved from West Texas to the mountains of Colorado, which is quite a shock and quite a difference. So, of course, I'm mesmerized with the mountains and the beauty and the wildlife. And so that's really when I started liking seeing the wildlife. I really wanted to see a moose. That was like the first thing on my list. I want to see a moose. So then fast forward, I have kids. And I was one of those moms who took a picture of them every day, their first year of life. So I had a whole album of their first 365 days. And I'm capturing just about anything and everything. And as a family, we did a lot of fishing and a lot of hunting. And through that was really when my love for wildlife, photographing wildlife, started and developed. And I worked in the schools as a speech language therapist, took a break when my kids were young, trying to decide if working in a school system was something I wanted to do. And because I loved photography so much, I decided to pursue just my own portrait photography business. And so I did that for almost 8 years. And it was, on a trip that I said, I really would like to buy a different lens so that when I'm photographing wildlife, maybe I could get better pictures. And that was near the end of 2018. So I bought a Tamron 150 to 600, nothing fancy, took it out for the elk rut and pretty much decided that I didn't want to photograph people anymore and I wanted to photograph wildlife. I was totally hooked on it. So starting out 2019, which is basically when I started photographing wildlife, I just pursued that with more intent or design to find and photograph animals and try to work on how good I was, and that's the rest is history.
Wow. So, are you relatively close to Rocky Mountain National Park?
I am about 2 hours from Rocky Mountain.
Okay, so do you have an elk population near your home that is easy to get to, or are you traveling quite a bit?
Interestingly enough, I do have an elk population that is near my home, but elk are smart, and the moment you stop or try to photograph, they don't give you, they give you maybe 8 seconds. They don't stick around. So obviously traveling to a place where animals are a little more accustomed to human traffic makes that easier for photography. And so that's where I generally go to photograph elk. It's beautiful there anyway, but it is a great place to capture and observe them, especially during the rut.
I get that 100%. People say to me all the time, oh, you live in Pennsylvania, there's bear there, there's deer there. Like, why are you traveling all these distances to shoot what you have at home? But it's the same thing that you just mentioned. Things are so skittish around me in my area. So you have to travel where they're a little bit more used to people. And, photography, there's nothing like being close.
Absolutely. Yes. And especially, in a time like that for the rut, I consider it a blessing that we even really get to watch and observe what they're doing. And they're not just up in the trees somewhere where you can hear them, but you don't, always get to see them. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did say being close, there's no way to replace that. And obviously we want to be very careful. We don't want to get in the way and get hurt or get the animal hurt. But I did hear a story about being close from the Beyond the Wild guys now. And I know that you took a trip with a couple of those guys, and they told a story about getting close to a polar bear on their podcast. And I would love to hear your version of that story.
Right. So on this trip, we had already gone out once on a Zodiac, and there were some bears, but they were some distance away. We weren't close. The other opportunity that we had with a bear, we were actually on our icebreaker ship. She came in close. And then the next opportunity we had, there was a female bear who was walking the shoreline. So we all boarded the Zodiacs and came over to the shoreline. We were following her for a while. And, she came to a section of the shoreline where she sort of stopped. And our guide, I'm photographing, right? I'm thinking all these things in my mind. I'm just photographing. And through the lens, we're just getting closer and closer and closer to this bear. And I'm not changing my focal length or anything, so I'm like, okay. So then I pull the camera down and I realize we have kind of nosed in, and whether the bear was thinking it or not, it looked like this bear was thinking like, I think I could, maybe jump and get on this little ship here thing. And I think I turned in that moment, and I turned to our guide and I'm like, are you going to back up? And he was obviously totally in control. He was already, moving us away, but it was one of those moments when, the eyes get a little big and you don't really think you're going to be that close to a polar bear, and then you are. And especially when you're looking through your lens at times, it can be a little deceiving.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember, and this is totally different kind of experience. I mean, that's a polar bear, but I remember photographing black bears with a mirrorless camera for the first time. And you have that, what you see is what you get in your viewfinder, and you have the ability to hit your play button and review your images, and you can review them through the viewfinder. And I remember, not being accustomed to that, looking into my viewfinder and then looking up with my camera and not realizing that I was looking at the image that I had already recorded. And this bear, I had zoomed in the back, to be able to really look at the image. And this bear in my viewfinder was super close. And obviously he wasn't nearly as close as my zoomed in image. But yeah, the technology is pretty good, and it can startle you at times.
Yes. Well, nonetheless, that moment, and the guy did a great job, obviously, and in that particular moment, there were some really great shots that were captured, and lifelong memory of perhaps a bear jumping aboard ship and devouring us. But it was great. It was really great. And the guides, that's what's great about guides is they're very knowledgeable and they know what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, fantastic memories to carry with you. And I guess you did end up taking the plunge into the Arctic water?
I sure did. And I was the only lady to actually go totally underwater, and they have you tied to a rope, and they told us, just let go of the ladder, fall back into the water. Fell back in the water, and if I hadn't had that rope with me, I would have just been swept away. It was kind of amazing how far the current was. Wow. And took my breath away a bit, but what an amazing opportunity. What a great challenge just to do it. And I'm really happy that us ladies did it. And we got to sit in the sauna afterward, and they had a hot tub on the ship and delicious hot cocoa. So it was great.
Did your hair freeze before you made it to the hot tub? Like, was it crystallizing in your hair? Icicles?
No, it was pretty quick. I got once I got back on the ship, they wrapped me on a towel and I ran straight for the sauna. And so there was no time for my hair to freeze or anything like that.
Wow. Pretty cool experience. Your reputation, I guess, from what I have heard from other people, and maybe even heard from the other podcasts that you did, is that you're always smiling, you're always positive, you're always kind out there in the field. So thinking about that kind of thing here, I want to start looking at some of your images. Something else that I think anyone who follows you would see is that you like to share scriptures on your stories. So, you have this very positive aura about you that anyone that's looking at your work is going to see. So I look at, you shared some images with us. The first one that I would like to look at is a grizzly bear with a cub on her back. It's a fantastic low angle, and just one of those moments that I think that if you go to photograph grizzlies during the salmon run, you want to capture this image. So maybe tell us a little bit about that story.
Absolutely. So I would say that for sure, that was a highlight of my trip to Alaska. Although I would say that picking a highlight from that trip would be incredibly difficult. Alaska is amazing. Where we were at was amazing. The opportunities that were presented were amazing. But that particular moment with that cub and her mother, and we had a few moments with her, but I chose that particular picture as my favorite picture, because I probably have 1,000 pictures of that duo, mother-cub duo, and they're all fantastic, all incredible, amazing. But when I traveled to Alaska, I went in the summer of 2022. And near the end of 2021, I experienced something incredibly tragic in my life and traumatic. And I was in a very lost, sort of broken place. And growing up in faith, growing up faithful, I'd never really questioned my faith in God, my purpose in life. And I found myself all of a sudden questioning life, the purpose of life, the purpose of what I'm doing, having doubts in my faith and insecurities in God's plan and provision for my life. And I really struggled for quite a while, and I retreated a bit, and I didn't want to go outside. I didn't want to photograph. And this opportunity to go to Alaska presented itself, and I decided what a better way to try to find some answers and step outside of my comfort zone, try something new. I traveled to Alaska alone. I basically met up with strangers and slept in tents in brown bear country in Alaska. So I'm doing things that are outside of my comfort zone, and then I get there, and the beauty of Alaska just sort of hits me, and I'm already feeling kind of emotional and connected. And we stumble across this mother and her cub, and we realize when we see her from a distance that she's got a cub on her back, and so we pursue, moving closer. And as a photographer, as you know, you have sometimes a lot of thought processes going on all at once when you're capturing. And of course, I'm thinking like, I don't want to blow this moment. This is a great moment. Please, Lord, help me make the most of this. Please help me capture it the way that I really hope to. And all of the sudden, it seemed like a sense of sort of calm came over. And I had a moment when this cub stood up on its mother's back to really ponder the size of that little tiny cub in relation to its mother. That cub was the smallest of all the cubs we had seen and captured. And she seemed so tiny, so fragile, so vulnerable, and so completely dependent and trusting on her mother's comfort and provision. And I think in that moment, I call them sort of God winks. It felt like it was given to me, and he was giving me a God wink, and I had an opportunity to say, okay, like, I see you, I hear you, I see that I can trust you and depend on you, that you will care for me, and that you will provide for me, just as you have in this great, big, beautiful landscape, down to the very perfect detail, just created everything perfectly and how it needs to be. It was like a very emotional moment. Sometimes I still get emotional when I talk about it. But it just made me realize that I can seek the guidance of God, and then I can be dependent on him, and I can seek comfort and trust in him. And it set the tone for the rest of my trip to sort of be open to seeing just God in all the details, and having a new revelation or fuel for my own faith, and realizing, and too, that it's okay for me to have moments where, it's not just 100% grand. You can have doubts, you can have confusion, and even anger, which is a period that I was kind of struggling with. And so that moment was so impactful. And I never would have thought that a moment that I could look back on it really and realize that I had such a grand impact, in my life. But now I seek them all the time.
Yeah. Wow, that's a fantastic story. And looking at that image and hearing that story, and it just makes the image so much more special. And no doubt for you, but I mean, for anyone that looks at it now that has heard this story, that's just a wonderful way to look at it, that God has everything in control and he's watching out for us. And sometimes,
he's got my back.
Yeah. And whenever we are the smallest, and kind of whenever we're brought down to our lowest point, sometimes is whenever we really see him.
Yes. There's a verse, I think it's in, I want to say it's in maybe James. I could be wrong, but it talks about counting suffering as joy. And, I never really understood that verse, never had any, importance really for me in my life until that particular season. And when you kind of move through something like that, then you can look back and say, wow, I can count it all as joy. I was drawn closer to God. I was shaped and sharpened, and I'm more acute now to understand and process through things, and stand in the strength of Christ, and know that everything will be okay.
Yeah. None of us want to go through those things. None of us want to learn the lesson that way. But unfortunately, I think that's what it takes many, many times to go through a trial and then to come out on the other side and then have that perspective that you gain.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that's why John 16:33 is probably one of my favorite verses at the moment. Jesus is speaking and he says that in the world you'll have tribulation, but take heart, I've overcome the world. And there's so much hope. There's so much hope in that. And people need hope. And so I cling to that quite often.
He loves us so much. He has our best interest at heart. And to have this image, to have that moment where you were able to see how much he loves you, that's wonderful. Awesome stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And I could draw a lot of parallels with all of those moments with that cub duo. Like that particular image I titled it, I Got Your Back. But, that bear would hang on to we nicknamed her Cowgirl because as the mom would run down the river for salmon, that bear would just hang on, never wanting to let go. And if it did fall off, it would immediately climb back on. And so I often think that at times it is totally okay for me to want to feel really close and cling to the closeness, within my faith. And that at times as well, even if I fall off and I feel far, I'm not far. He's always with me. We're together. There was a lot of parallels. That was just, and people may say, well, that's how you saw it. But I think when you have faith and you're seeking that, God opens your eyes and your ears to hear what he is trying to express. And that it truly felt like that.
Yeah, for sure. I think these things are all around us all the time. It's just having that spirit to be able to see it. Being around all of those bears. Now, I've been in several situations where I've been around a lot of bears all at once. And in this situation, I'm sure you're near the water. They're all fishing. Tell me a little bit about that, just being so in such close proximity to so many bears.
Yeah. So the first day, maybe the second day, the second day was our first, full day that we went out, and there was an opportunity where we were set up, basically kind of like on the shoreline, but like kind of on a rock bank. And the bears were just running, after fish. And, they're not necessarily close at the time, but as they're running, they get closer and closer. And I'm shooting with my 400. And all of a sudden the bear is no, he's completely feeling the frame, and I literally, and I had the perfect guide. His name is Sean Sharp. He was, gentle and soft-spoken. He was the perfect guide for me. And I sort of looked up at him, and I'm sure my eyes were just giant. And I stood up and I walked behind him because he's, of course, he has to be 6'2". He's very tall. And I stood behind him, and he assured me that, everything would be okay. But as time went on, I got more and more comfortable. And there were times, I assumed that bears would be close, but there were times that they were very close. And I never quite imagined that they would be that close. But it was quite fascinating, and they clearly had plenty to eat and weren't interested in much else than fishing. But it was amazing. It was amazing to be that close to them, to watch and observe them. I think that was the greatest thing about that trip as well. It's nonstop all day long. You have opportunity after opportunity. And I feel like some of my best work really came from my time there in Alaska, because I had time to reevaluate how I would want to shoot something, where I want to stand, or if I want to lay down, or what settings I want to use. It wasn't so much of that quick thinking that oftentimes happens when you're photographing wildlife. And I could try a variety of different things because the animal was still there and still doing something. I loved that. Everybody should experience that, I feel like.
It's on my list.
Yes.
I have a very small spot where I'm putting some money penny by penny. It's going to take a while, but one of these days.
Well, and coming back from Alaska, I totally fell in love with bears. And you actually have some quite amazing black bear photos. So I've been sort of obsessed with the idea of me capturing some beautiful black bears just as you have.
Well, yeah, the black bears, a little bit different than the brown bears. They're a little more docile, maybe, I guess. But yeah, they're a lot of fun, definitely.
Yeah.
We got bit. Our family got bit by the Smokies the first time we went down there. It gets into your blood, and ever since then, it's just, how can we get back there more often? I absolutely love, though, this image, swimming through salmon, that you shared. And we'll put this on the screen. And that foreground is just amazing. The way that the bear's chin is just either just barely or just barely not touching the water, that low angle is just something else. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Yes. So I have a shot of this same bear from a higher vantage point. So you can see the bear in the pool of water, you can see his whole body, and you can see all of the salmon. Yeah.
Oh, wow. So you like probably had to hike up and then come down.
Yeah, there was a higher vantage point, so you could see it.
And that's what's so cool about Alaska. You have the time in this scenario to be able to move around and get those different vantage points and tell a complete story. Wow.
Yeah, and the shot from the higher vantage point was incredible, and it's amazing. Something I never thought I would really get to see, and I love those shots. But that shot in particular, that was probably another true favorite from that trip. I absolutely, and the bear is probably, I can't quite remember, but maybe 5 or 6 feet from me, swimming through, and all the salmon are just pushing around him. And I was fascinated with this salmon in the first place. It was so incredible and amazing to see all that beautiful salmon there. And that shot in particular, I just knew that I really wanted to capture a different perspective of that. And it turned out exactly how I wanted it to. So that's another one. I just am very proud of that particular shot. It was something I wanted, and it was something I executed. So it felt like a great reward.
This episode of the Wild Shutter Podcast is brought to you by Cotton Carrier. The Cotton Carrier G3 harness system is my favorite way to carry my camera when I'm out in the field. The ergonomic design of the G3 harness system distributes the weight of your camera, helping to lessen the fatigue of a long shooting day. The G3 keeps you hands-free, your equipment safe, and your body mobile and ready to shoot. Use the link in the description below and use the coupon code WILDShutter to get 10% off your purchase at cottoncarrier.com. Now, let's get back to the podcast.
I've asked several guests this question. Do you hang your work in your home anywhere?
I do. I have a few. I think if I'm going to spend as much time and money on photography, that I should at least showcase a few of my pieces.
Yeah.
And not in a selfish way, perhaps.
No, not at all. I hear different people say sometimes that they don't, and I always think, why not? I love seeing that hanging on the wall. It just makes me feel, in the middle of the winter sometimes when you feel like you're getting cabin fever and you look at some of these images, and maybe you're so busy with life and you don't have a chance to get out, and you can look at those images and it just brings you some joy.
Yeah, absolutely. It totally brings me joy to, like I said, I've really only been photographing wildlife since 2019. And in the first couple of years of that, I felt like it was constant. I've got to get out for experience. I've got to find some animals. I've got to do this, or I've got to do that. And really trying to learn skill sets, or maybe even learn a little bit about how I like to photograph an animal and what I don't like. And I feel like I'm finally kind of at that place where I've learned a lot of those things. Not that I have stopped learning, because literally every time I go out and photograph, I'm still learning. And I learned quite a bit when I was in Norway as well with the polar bears. Photographing on white background, white subjects, white backgrounds, that proved to be quite a challenge for me. But so when I have those moments when I really execute something and it's a photo that turned out just how I might have wanted it, I feel like that's like my trophy or my souvenir. So I'm going to put it in my house,
Yeah, for sure. So you said like white background, white subject, very difficult. What is your method for shooting? Are you using all manual settings? Are you doing auto ISO? What is your go-to practice?
Yes. So when I was in Norway, I found that I was really struggling with ISO. I was really struggling getting the right, exposure exactly the way I wanted it to. So that was probably the trip that I used auto ISO the most on, just so that I would put it there and I would see like, okay, what is my camera wanting me to do? So, and then I would maybe make adjustments, based on that. I think if I'm going to spend money on a camera that's smart, that sometimes I can utilize some of the skill sets that it has to maybe help me along the way. But the majority of the time, I like to shoot in manual. Sometimes in really low light settings, I will use auto ISO just to take out some of the guesswork out of it. And just, we're in a low light setting anyway. As you know, sunset, the time when it starts to set can be really quick. So I often use that then. Yeah.
Yeah, whenever the light's changing so quickly, it can be a little bit difficult. And think about auto ISO, if you are using it, that you adjust the compensation. So to me, whether you're using manual ISO or auto, you're still making a decision. You're just making that decision in a different way. So I don't know. Yeah. I guess there's advantages in different scenarios, like you're saying. But the technology that we have right now is just outstanding. The focusing abilities and everything. I still make a lot of mistakes every single time I go out somehow. Somehow I outsmart the camera and prove how dumb I am. So it's it's fun though to have so much technology at our fingertips for sure.
Yeah, and and being on a trip with other photographers, if I would express that I was struggling with trying to figure out getting the shot right because I couldn't figure out the exposure, it was always great too because they would mention like something, try this or do that. And that's the great thing about being connected with other photographers is they can pass along some of the knowledge that I might not have, because I certainly don't know everything and I'm still learning something new all the time.
Yeah, I learned something new, a different thing to try or a different mistake to make every single time I go out. So for sure, there's learning going on all the time. And if you're not learning, not growing, you're not getting better. So that's the goal, really. So you shared an image colliding with seasons. And before I even talk to you about that, we were talking about the elk before, and I seem to remember, this may have been a while ago, that you had a mule deer that was like the neighborhood mule deer. Is that true?
Mm-hmm.
And you had some opportunities with him. Is this that same guy?
I have a few neighborhood mule deer that were quite nice. I guess it depends on which one, but I do live in an area where there's a lot of deer, and some nice sizable bucks. Deer in particular will probably always be a favorite animal for me to photograph. When the second home we purchased was kind of out in the country and there were deer just all the time. And I fell in love with seeing them and photographing them. And deer was also the first really big animal that I ever went on a hunt for besides a turkey. And I absolutely love deer. I used to think that mule deer were probably the prettiest deer And then I started spending more time with whitetails, and I feel like I equally love both. Yeah.
Yeah,
Although
I'm
there would
partial
be
to
some
whitetails.
whitetail fans out there, like maybe Matt Hansen, who would say like, nah, whitetails are better.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm partial to whitetails, but I can appreciate the mule deer too. So
Yeah.
this image that you have is just the snow element that is against that colorful background of the fall. It's just a beautiful picture. So tell us the story about capturing that.
I think that's another one of those moments where I felt very rewarded for capturing and executing a photo exactly how I would have wanted to. I don't particularly love winter photography. I'm not a fan of cold weather. Sometimes shooting in snow can be difficult. But that particular day, it was a nice, beautiful, light, often heavy, but in between kind of snow. And I had seen this deer crossing a field, and I thought, okay, I'm not going to second guess myself. I'm going to go where he's going. So I parked my car and I kind of walked to this section where all these trees were, and the fall colors were still just gorgeous. And I went where he was going, and he happened to cross, right in front of me, and I captured the scene pretty much how I wanted to. I love the foreground. I love the background. I love the element of the snow. I didn't blow it on the focus, with the snowfall. It has a touch of softness, yet it's really strong. I really love qualities like that in a photo. Matt Hansen, to me, is one of those guys who really does that very, very well with his photos. He has a lot of photos that have this soft, like, beautiful color. His colors are always really beautiful, but they're very strong photos. And so that was one that I was like, yes, I knew when I captured it. I was like, I did it. Like, I know I'm going to love this one,
And people, if you haven't photographed in snow, people don't realize how difficult it really can be, not only with not only with exposure, but with focus. Those snowflakes are falling down at different lengths from you to the subject, and your camera oftentimes wants to grab onto that. So you got to go with manual a lot of times, and that's not always the easiest thing to do.
Yeah, that was a great moment. And another thing about snow is I don't often shoot with a tripod or even a monopod. And so actually making sure that I didn't blow the focus is usually because I'm, shivering and cold. But yeah. I had at least been in my car moments before, so that didn't happen.
No, I'm 100% with you. I live in Pennsylvania, and the winters can get kind of long, especially whenever they start early November sometimes, and then you get to March and you're like, oh, won't this end? And I think we're still not very warm right now. Here we are in April, and I get cold easy, like my hands and my toes. I'm not built for the cold weather. So I like those images, and whenever there is a subject, it's awesome to be out there doing it. But it's miserable whenever you don't have a subject and you're looking for one and you're cold and you're probably sweating because you're walking trying to find it, and it's just it's not a good time.
Yeah.
But that's wildlife photography, right? If you weren't miserable, you aren't doing it right.
Yeah. If you didn't have to endure something to get it, that it's too easy.
Exactly. Yeah. So morning to remember with this elk, and you've already spoken about how much you love elk, and this image is just beautiful with this big bull coming up out of the water, and you can see some splashes around his feet or his hooves there. So tell us a little bit about the background behind that image.
So I'm pretty sure other photographers do this, and it can't be just me, but oftentimes I will dream up scenarios or envision a photograph that I would really like to have occur. And when you're photographing elk, oftentimes they're in the same locations, kind of doing the same things. And often there's other people there photographing the same elk. And so sometimes you think to yourself, well, I wish I could have maybe this happen, or, like something different happen. And this particular morning, I stopped at a lake before the sun had even risen, and I was listening for bugles, and sure enough, there was a bugle. So I thought, okay, I might get lucky. This could be the day. Maybe I'll get him in the water. And that morning just unfolded absolutely beautifully in a way that I would have envisioned or dreamt up. The light was beautiful. I got some beautiful captures. And it was something different from, some of the typical spots or scenarios with elk that occur. So that will probably be a favorite, just because it was something that I wanted to happen, that did happen. And it wasn't, and it didn't happen at, 11:30 in the morning with flashy light. It happened just perfectly and beautifully, and it all unfolded. God gave me a wink that day and said, here you go. And then I left and said, oh, thank you. Yeah.
So our elk area in Pennsylvania, there is a stream that I envisioned this picture happening at, and I've never been able to capture it, and I see everyone else get it there, and I'm like, no! And, it's tough because you make a choice. It's about 3 hours from my house, so you wake up super early with elk. You've got to be there before the sun comes up, and sometimes you get 15 minutes with them, and like you said earlier, they're gone, and your day is over. So 3 hours back home. So it's always the debate, do you stay in that beautiful location where what you want to have happen could take place, or do you kind of drive around and try to find them? And that's always such a hard decision to make, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. There's lots of hard decisions, I think, sometimes as a photographer to make, and I often find myself second guessing myself or getting impatient, or, I feel like most of the time I make the wrong choice, and then sometimes I don't. But there's a lot of different, you're thinking a lot of different things all at once sometimes. So this year in particular with, elk rut and the deer rut, I told myself I have zero expectations for this trip. I'm just going to capture what comes along, and I'm going to, say hello to people, talk to some people, and just enjoy the opportunity that I have to just be out here doing this and experiencing what I get to experience. And that's kind of what I did this fall, and I didn't put too much pressure on myself. And but in the same way of doing that, I think it also helps me realize, like, okay, you can maybe pursue something that you would really hope to happen, or like, how you would want to photograph it. And if it doesn't happen, that's okay. You can try again the next time, But like you said, if you have to drive 3 hours for it, it makes that decision a little harder.
Yeah, for sure. But I think it's probably the more experience you have, I guess, kind of like with what you're saying, I'm becoming more and more accepting of it probably isn't going to work out. Or I shouldn't say it that way. If it doesn't work out, it's okay.
Yeah.
We talk about FOMO a lot. And I think the older I get, the more experiences I have in the wild, I realize that it's not that big of a deal. Now, that being said, I'm not making my livelihood by being a photographer. So I think that definitely would put a different kind of pressure on you, that you need to perform pretty much every time you go out. And I'm glad I don't have that pressure.
Absolutely. And a lot of those people who are making it their livelihood generally spend money and time for travel. So they want to make the most of the money spent and the time spent doing it. And of course, hope that they capture what they need to, so that it, still supplies a means to their livelihood. So there is a whole different pressure in that realm. And I often think to myself how much I would love to, maybe have a deer photo on the cover of a magazine, or even turkey, because I love turkeys. I would love to get better at photographing turkeys, but, it would be so great if I had, something like that happen. And I think, well, I could make that happen maybe, but I'd also have to pursue it. And then it changes your direction a little if you're really pursuing something like that. So
it's all the mindset and how you're going about it. And I guess for right now, the position that I'm in, the position that maybe you're in or other people are in, we're just going to enjoy being there.
Yes. Well, that's definitely the position I'm in right now. And I just want to soak up a lot of those moments. And I really want to observe all the intricate beauty in the world. And, what a blessing it is that I have the time to seek out opportunities like that. And, whether it be in a sunrise or a sunset, these are just glimpses to me of like heavenly places. The dawn chorus of the birds, the smell and the feel of the air, the colors in the sky, an animal walking across the field. Those feel like heavenly places to me. And now when the world is really distracting and chaotic and noisy, that's where I would like to be. And so I'm just going to keep doing that.
Yeah. So whenever you go out, obviously we need to take a camera, we need to take a lens. What is Amy carrying with her that you absolutely have to not leave the car without?
Right. Well, I would love to say that the answer to this is batteries. But there have been a few times, sadly, when how unprofessional of me that I left, my vehicle with no more batteries. And thanks to perhaps good folks who are with me, they give me batteries, or I have to make the jaunt, all the way back to my car for a battery. So I'm getting better, much better, about making sure that I snag an extra battery and have it on me at all times. But probably the other thing is a phone. I make sure I have my phone on with me always. I'm not always photographing with other people. And I go out often by myself. That's one great thing I think photography has pushed me to do is I like to do a lot of things by myself. Partly because I am seeking those moments, those quiet moments, and partly because, I'm hoping to capture maybe something different or unique. And, if somebody's with me, it takes away from my focus for that. But I also love to photograph with people and chat with people and have experiences with people. But oftentimes I'm alone, and I will also sleep in my car alone. So I want to make sure that I always have my phone with me and always have my phone charged. Just being a woman is a little different. And, I like to make sure that I have a way that feels like a security blanket for me, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And that's fantastic advice. Always have that phone with you just in case you get into a situation. Let someone know, too, where you're going so that, if you're not checking in, that they can maybe check on you. And I agree 100%. I don't mind shooting with people, and there's a joy in that, but I would rather do it by myself many, many times. There's a lot of reasons for that. I think that you hit the nail on the head. Like, that's my time to kind of decompress and to just be quiet and not have things that I have to do, people that I have to talk to. And, it's nice to just be out in nature and observe. And as you mentioned, too, with other people photographing, I've been with maybe one other person or two other people, and we all shoot things differently, but you're all getting the same thing, and there's been times where I've been like, is that my image? Oh, no, that's so-and-so's image. So not that it isn't any less special, but in a way, maybe it is a little bit. I like to have something that someone else didn't capture.
Yeah. Yeah, and no doubt, I feel like too, sometimes, when you're with people, you can end up, I have a tendency anyway, to end up socializing, and then I'm like, oh, I missed that. Oh, well, but at least if it's with me, then I know that I'm like staying focused perhaps, and I may not miss a shot.
Well, and I feel bad too whenever someone's talking and I'm just Yeah, I hear you. But I'm looking
Yeah.
around. Like,
Don't worry,
I
I'm
want to
paying attention.
know. Yeah. But if something comes, this conversation's over.
Yeah, exactly.
For the rest of 2024, and it's hard to believe, and probably by the time that
Right.
this comes out, it'll be towards the end of May, where we'll be about halfway through this year. What else is on your plate as far as adventure for Amy?
Yes. So I am going to Africa. I'll be traveling to Africa in July and returning in August. I'm traveling to Africa alone, which in some ways I'm quite terrified to do, but I know that I'm capable and that everything will be okay. And then I'm going to be meeting up with some people that I know, obviously, but I'm hoping that Africa is another just incredible experience, something that, impacts my life in a very meaningful way. That's what I'm hoping for. I was really hoping to do some black bears that I was thinking that might pan out. We'll still see. That may not pan out. But then it is almost 100% sure that I will be going to Brazil for the panel jaguar in October.
Wow, that'd be quite an experience. So where in Africa are you heading?
So we'll be in Kruger and Limpopo, South Africa.
Wow. Yeah, well,
I've never been to Africa, so
no.
I'm excited to go. I have obviously some ideas of what I'd like to capture, but I kind of learned from Svalbard not to place like some high expectation. Svalbard was great, don't get me wrong, that's not what I'm saying, but when I went to Alaska for bears, and then I went to Svalbard, and I think my experience with Alaska was just nonstop bear action, and I think I had kind of set that expectation for Norway, which was wrong of me in a way, but all of the experiences that I had there were incredible. It was just a little slower go, than it was like in Alaska. So I'm going to try really hard not to set any sort of, expectation for Africa and just let it unravel the way it is meant to unravel. But obviously there's some shots or some things that I'd really love to see.
And I've heard nothing but fantastic things about how they treat you in Africa. I mean, you are treated like you're royalty whenever you're there. So I'm sure it's going to be a fantastic trip.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm excited. And it'll be here, obviously, before we know it.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. And I would encourage everyone to follow you, adventure.amy, on Instagram so they can see those African shots that'll be coming, the Brazilian shots that'll be coming, and anything else that happens along the way. I'm sure you've still got a bunch of images that you're going through from Svalbard and everywhere else. Yeah, and that's the beauty of it too, that you can take your time. And, I like in the morning, I wake up, I have my coffee, I edit an image, and it kind of gets the day off on a good foot.
Yeah.
So, Amy, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us. And everyone, we thank you for listening to the Wild Shutter podcast. If you haven't done so already, be sure to give us a follow. You can watch the videos so you can see Amy's fantastic images on YouTube. Find us, Wild Shutter, just do a search. It's under my name, Matthew Gehly, on YouTube. Join our community on Facebook. We have a Wild Shutter podcast group where you can share your images and get feedback from others in the group. It's a lot of fun to see the images that everyone is posting. You can also sign up for the Wild Shutter podcast newsletter, which highlights wildlife photographers, features information and tips on photography and wildlife species. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below if you enjoyed this conversation. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next time.